Well, hello and welcome. If you look right behind me, you'll know where we are, at the Great Pyramids of Giza, right outside of Cairo, my home. I'm Ramy Romany, and I was born here. I grew up studying ancient Egyptian history, archaeology, and language. I'm an archaeologist, Egyptologist, adventurer, explorer, and world traveler. And most importantly, your iFit guide. Stick with me on this next dozen workouts, and I'll take you to the most fascinating sites in ancient Egypt. I'll take you not only outside of those pyramids, I'll take you inside the Great Pyramid of Giza and show you the most recent discoveries, some of which we don't even know about fully yet. I'll show you who created the Great Pyramids, and I'll show you who created the idea of a pyramid, the grandfather of this guy. I'll travel in time with you. We'll go to the most fascinating temples of Luxor, and then we'll cross the Nile into the city of the dead, the Valley of the Kings, and I'll show you the tomb of King Tut. Join me, see the world, and get in shape. All right, so 3 pyramids right next to me. They've been there for thousands and thousands of years. To be exact, 4,536 years. They're still in place, quite intact. But a lot of people sometimes ask me that question, ancient Egypt, how ancient Egypt really is. And it's a hard question to answer, and sometimes I can't tell you what ancient Egyptians did and what ancient Egyptians do because they are so ancient. From the time of the first ancient Egyptian king to the last ancient Egyptian king, that time is more than the time from the last ancient Egyptian king to today. Which means ancient Egyptians were more ancient to themselves than they are ancient to us now. That's how long that civilization lasted. It was the longest lasting civilization in the world. Nowhere close to today's civilizations. America's only 300 years old. We're talking about a civilization that lasted more than 3,500 years. That's 10 times, more than 10 times what America today is. So it's not easy to tell you what they did and what they do, because just in the past 50 years, everything changed. Now think about things changing all the time. Now that being said, this is a great example of what Egypt is like today and what it was like back then. Because if you look at the Great Pyramids of Giza, and if you look right next to it, you will see the city. That is Cairo. That's where I grew up. A lot of people think that the pyramids are in the middle of the desert, but they're only in the middle of the desert because I stand in a spot where you can see the pyramids in the background and everything else is desert. The reality is the city encroached all the way to the edge of the Great Pyramids of Giza, and there are people that are living all around it. If it wasn't for the government stopping everyone and deciding the Egyptian pyramids have to stay intact, we couldn't even have this patch of desert. At the time in ancient Egypt, this side of the Nile, the west side of the Nile, was only a place for the dead. The Nile was the split of Egypt at the time between the city of the living and the city of the dead. And that's why the pyramids are on this side, the west side. They believed that the sun would rise on the eastern side of the Nile and then sets on the western side of the Nile, and in that same side the sun would rise for the dead. And that's why ancient Egyptians believed that the west side of the Nile was where the dead would live for eternity. And that's why their pyramids, their tombs, are right here. Now on the east side of the Nile, their houses would have been. Unlike today, of course, all Egyptians live everywhere they can because there's nearly 100 million of them living on 1% of the land right next to the Nile. But even though we found those great pyramids as tombs, we found other pyramids and tombs everywhere. You probably hear about all the ancient Egyptian tombs we find, all 99 pyramids we found. We have never found a single ancient Egyptian palace, ancient Egyptian house of some king that lived in it, even though they must have been glorious. But the reality of the matter is that they weren't. They weren't built to survive. They were only built for the living time, and they knew and they believed that the living is a short amount of time, and their real house, their house of eternity, is their tomb. And that's literally what the word tomb in ancient Egyptian meant, per-hacht, which means the house of eternity. They believed that this is where they're gonna live for the rest of their lives. And that's why they made themselves a mummy. Because the mummy will keep their body intact for the rest of time, all which they will survive for eternity. I've come here, I'm not even exaggerating, I've been here more than 1,000 times to the Great Pyramids of Giza. And every time I'm here, I really just come over and I look at them and I'm mind blown. Even though I studied every part of them and I tried to figure out how they were built and how they were made and all the theories out there. And even if I find a theory that makes so much sense, it's still the execution of this marvelous building is mind-blowing. It's unbelievable. Nearly 5,000 years ago, they built these. And when you look at them from far away, you think they're not as massive as they are. They are. Every little rock, if you look at every little rock that is building any of those 3 pyramids, every little block is 5 to 7 tons each. 5 to 7 tons. And each one is nearly the size of a small New York apartment, which is not saying much. But put 2 million of them together, stacked on a perfect pyramid shape with no glue. No glue, no cement that sticks them together. And you get the most amazing structure of the ancient times. I've made that bet before, and it's easy for me to make because it's unlikely for people to execute. But I've bet that no one today can build a pyramid like those. A pyramid that was built more than nearly 5,000 years ago. No one today can build it. If you look right next to that pyramid, that's a great example actually. If you look right next to that pyramid, that's a 3rd pyramid, the smallest of the 3. But if you look right next to it, there are 3 other pyramids in front of it. And those, we call them the Queen Pyramids. And in those, they are the tombs for obviously the Queen and the sons or the daughters of the king at the time. In this case, it would be King Menkauura. Those 3 pyramids here are the iconic 3 pyramids of Egypt. Even though we found 99 of them, but those 3 are the most famous. When you look at the one in the middle, it's the biggest one, it looks like the biggest one, but it's not the biggest one. It's just on the highest ground. The biggest pyramid and the most important one is the one all the way on the right, which is Khufu's pyramid. It's extremely important. All around you, you'll see that the pyramid, the desert around the pyramid is full of sand. But back at the time, this wasn't as much sand as it is today. It was mostly that limestone. The reason they chose this spot as the pyramids plateau where they're going to build their pyramid is that it was where the local quarry is. They can quarry the stones, the limestone, straight from here and stack it up and make a pyramid. And then they wanted to find the best casing for a pyramid possible. And for that, they would go further away to get the finest limestone, dig it up, and put it right there for the casing. The casing that doesn't exist today. And the reason it doesn't exist today is not what you think. It wasn't because of nature or time. It didn't just fall. It was quarried. Ancient Egypt went through phases, and the Greeks came, the Romans came, and then the Arab conquest came. Different Islamic civilizations took place. And at some point, the pyramids weren't as valuable for people as they are today. They were just a bunch of old buildings that are hanging around doing nothing. And when they needed massive amounts of rocks, they would just quarry the pyramids. One of my favorite things to see is always local Egyptian tourists coming over and seeing their own pyramids. And that always happens here at the Great Pyramids of Giza. It's not just foreigners from all over the world coming to see the pyramids, but it's also Egyptians. Everyone loves it here. That's the other thing, is that when people come from all over the world to see the Great Pyramids of Giza, there's some ownership to everyone. They come over and they don't feel like this belongs to someone else. It belongs to all humans. I've met so many different nationalities in Egypt through my life, and when they come here, this is not an Egyptian pyramid. This is all humans' pyramid, and I love that. Now, if you look right on the edges of the bottom of this pyramid, the small pyramid for the King Menkauura, right at the bottom edges there are casing rocks. All these casing rocks were making the pyramid was completely flat, like smooth pyramid. All these casing rocks were the ones that were quarried, the ones that they chose to take and build different dams from. It is known that one of the main dams in Egypt that are on the Nile was built from pyramid stones. So at least we still have the stones, just on a dam. You can't come all the way here without touching it. This is one of the blocks that was quarried more than 5,000 years ago to build the small pyramid, as we call it. And if you look up there, look all the way up, that is the smallest of the three pyramids. And this is a rock that was brought all the way from a city called Aswan. Aswan is 1,000 kilometers away, nearly 600 miles away. They brought these on Nile boats and they bring them all the way here to build a pyramid with them. Nearly 5,000 years ago. I can't stop saying it because it is mind-blowing. This is the only pyramid of the three. Menkauura is the only pyramid of the three that has casing all the way from 600 miles south. The rest were very special casings from a local quarry that is 50 miles away. But look at that pyramid. It's so glorious. 4,500 years ago, this would have been newly built. And those casings on the top, do you see that white casing on the top? Would have went all the way down, as smooth can be. Shiny, bright white with a golden top. Right next to every pyramid, there is a funerary temple, and then a causeway that goes all the way down to the Nile. And right at the end of that causeway, there is a valley temple, which is the temple that the dead king would first land in. Now the Nile, back at the ancient Egyptian times, was much closer than it is today to the pyramids. And it was closer for the longest time. But then the high dam was built back in the 50s, and that's when the flooding stopped and the Nile became more consistent. And that's why the Nile is in one place and it doesn't flood right next to the pyramids anymore. Look at that. Wow. I'm from here, and every time I'm mind blown, I tell you, look at that. This pyramid is very special out of three. The biggest one is the biggest one, and everyone knows about it. But this one is the son, the Khafre. His name is Khafre, or Khafra. King Khafre is the one that owns the very famous Sphinx. he decided to put his Sphinx next to his valley temple, all the way down on the Nile. Look at that. There's so many theories about how these things were constructed and who constructed them. People are so lost sometimes when they look at them that they think humans couldn't have done this, and that aliens from space would have come and built those pyramids. And I'm flattered when people think so, because that's how awesome our ancient Egyptians were. But also, 2 years ago, a piece of papyrus was found right next to the pyramids, all the way down there. And it was a piece of papyrus that was written by a guy called Imri. And Imri was the chief workman at the workman's village of the Great Pyramid of Giza. He was the head of all the workers, which was a very important job back at the time. And he wrote in detail about everything that was taking place at that time. Just 2 years ago we discovered that. He wrote that all the blocks would come to the pyramids through canals, which was a revelation for us because we didn't know how they transported all these rocks, even if they brought them all the way from the Nile to here, but how would they just move them to the pyramids? But he said that all the rocks were coming through canals. So they would dig canals from the Nile, have boats on those canals with massive 5 to 7 ton blocks on each boat, and have these boats going around. So you can imagine back at the time when this was being built, it probably looked like the most busy port in the world. All these boats coming in, dropping massive blocks, sleds with blocks and workmen pulling them. I got this question many times before. How come ancient Egyptians didn't use cars with wheels to transport pyramid blocks? If they can build pyramids, why didn't they build cars? And there's a very simple answer to that. Cars don't work in the desert too much. Sleds work much better. So they use sleds mostly here in the desert. They would have 2 rows of workers pulling the sled behind them, and 3 people with pottery pots of water that are dropping water on the bodies of these workers. And if you look right underneath the ground, everywhere you go, you will see a piece of pottery that probably came from that time. It's a piece right here that probably came from that time. Everywhere on ancient Egyptian sites, there's pottery everywhere. They would drop water on their bodies and help them cool down all the way so they can take the pyramid blocks into the pyramids. But then now, how would they take the blocks and put them all the way up on the top? Which was a complete other problem. But around each pyramid, they created ramps. So they would build one level, create a ramp around it, and that ramp stays. And they keep taking the sleds with the blocks up that, and they keep going up all the way till they create the pyramid. Look, if you look over there, you will see how they dug into the land to put that pyramid here. And all this digging, you see all these marks, very symmetrical marks. These are the tools that they used at the time. You see how perfect, how smooth that wall is? That's how perfect the block came out too. They had a technique using pressure and water to drop long tools in order, and then they use pressure and water, and the block comes out in a perfect straight line, which funny enough is nearly the same technique they use today in local quarries. What a glorious structure. Right next to that pyramid, they found a pit. And that pit had a boat, a solar boat. A beautiful, massive wooden sailboat. Which was odd. Because why would they have a boat here next to the deceased king? Everyone believed that that was the boat that brought the king all the way to the pyramid, the dead king to the pyramid. But when they studied that boat, they found that that boat never sailed in any water before, which meant one thing and one thing only. Watch your step. That this boat was made for the afterlife and not for this life. Ancient Egyptians believed that once a king passes away, he goes into a journey in the afterlife before he gets to the final judgment. 12 hours of the underworld. All these hours, he needs a transportation method to sail across the deserts of the underworld, the Rosset Tau. Those deserts of the underworld are the ocean that he would be sailing in with this boat. Till he finally arrives to the place of Ma'at. The place of Ma'at is the place of justice, which is a courtroom with all the judges as gods. They will do the final judgment. He will go to trial in court. And the final judgment is to decide whether he was a good king or a bad king. They used the feather technique on that. They would put a feather on one side of the scale and the heart of the king on the other side of the scale. And if his heart was heavier than a feather, then he wasn't a good king. Then he has bad things in his heart that is weighing it down. And at that moment, he gets eaten by the alligator hippopotamus god and never sees eternity. But if the feather was if the feather was heavier than his heart, then his heart is light and it doesn't have bad things in it, and they would go to heaven, eternity. Now, do you know how many kings went to the final judgment and had a heavy heart? None. Because ancient Egyptians were also corrupt and they loved their kings. And all their kings were good men, good people with good hearts. Look at that. And we are here at the Great Pyramid of Giza, the most ancient and the only one surviving, one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. And the reason is not what you see right there, but what I'm about to show you next, inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. We're gonna crawl into tunnels inside that Great Pyramid. I'll show you things that no one has ever seen before, and I'll share with you stories about new discoveries inside that Great Pyramid. Well, this is it. Congratulations on this workout, and thank you for joining me. I hope your heart is beating as hard as mine, and not just because you did an amazing workout, but also because you watched these glorious pyramids and learned about them. Stick with me, and you won't regret it. I'm Ramy Romany, your iFit guide.